Cool.
Right,
Thanks,
Tom.
Julius. I got to share my screen. Uh, okay, yeah. So I'm going to be talking about some general ideas as to where Pangeos could go next. I'm going to be summarizing what I think we've done well so far, and these ideas are not really my ideas. There's a big list of them, and I'm responsible for very few of them. So this is really on behalf of many other people. But I do want to thank the people, the funders and employers that allow me to think about this stuff. Um, okay, so Pangeo's already done loads of cool stuff over the past several years, but why should we stop there? We could go further. So the structure of this talk is supposed to be an opinionated and deliberately provocative list of things that we could do next. It's a mix of gripes of things that are still frustrating and cool suggestions of stuff that would just be nice to have. I'm going to go fast because there's a lot of things. So think of this as like rapid fire to stimulate your brain. And the credit goes to others, but any omissions or mistakes are mine. And we'll have a discussion immediately afterwards. So let's get going. So first category, user experience. What do we think's gone well in Pangeo so far? A lot of value is delivered to users just by smoothing over various different file types. Like a lot of X-ray users get into it just because that immediately avoids a huge headache for them. We have high level but still powerful abstractions in the UI, like group by is amazing. And allowing scientists to think at that higher level of abstraction is a huge value add. We also have pretty seamless scaling beyond a single CPU. From going from like NumPy to Dask on a medium-sized problem works pretty well considering how complicated that is under the hood. I think that's worth celebrating. But how could it be better? Zero to Pangeo is still daunting, in my opinion. Like it's hard to evangelize. I'm sure you've all had this experience because where do you even tell people to start? Chunks. I hate chunks. I don't want to have to think about chunks. Why do we have to think that they've got nothing to do with the science? Like in an ideal world, that they are an implementation detail of parallelization and files. Ideally we would be able to just like allow users to forget about chunks as much as possible. Reliability improvements at scale would be nice, especially really large scale. And another personal gripe is that, like, I think that software should just be able to handle physical units for us. We've done some work on this with Pint X-Array, but I think this should be just integrated up and down the stack. And if you ask AstroPy people, then they'll like die on this hill. Okay, so that's first category. Second category, infrastructure. What do we think's gone well? I think that the fact that a large number of geoscience users have moved to the cloud is a big success. Like it's impressive that even happened, that people even moved. That we have Jupyter hubs, institutional Jupyter hubs within running on HPC and so on is also cool. And it's also nice that what we want has been well enough aligned that commercial providers like Coil, for example, want to provide us services that fit with our goal. We're not just like off in the middle doing something where no one else thinks it makes any sense. But what next? We have this kind of time bomb of like Pangeo-backed Jupyter hubs are just going to go away, because a lot of them are just some of them, as far as I know, are still backed by grants from Ryan at Columbia, or at least 2I2C maybe since then. But we have this general question of like, what do we do? Like, to what extent is Pangeo about infrastructure? Because we could just say that now we've demonstrated that idea works. You point people back towards either their institution or like a third-party provider in order to actually run or in order to actually access a Jupyter hub. Or we could go the other way and have like just like have a new season of Pangeo-backed infrastructure and think harder about how to make that like truly public. And one idea that someone floated was to have like public cloud buckets with sort of fixed size restrictions, but then you can kind of read and write to them to allow people to more easily get access to cloud resources. Okay, third category, software. This one's obviously a big one. What do we think's gone well? I think the fact that we have actually a modular stack is pretty cool. And the fact that our libraries are genuinely domain agnostic. They don't just say they're domain agnostic and then actually encode some like climate science specific or geoscience specific assumptions under the hood. They're actually really well decoupled, which I think is really impressive. And generally, our software standards are pretty good, especially in the core libraries, I would say. Not universally, but generally they're pretty good. So what next? So one idea that I thought was interesting and a bit provocative is the idea that we should be trying harder to have fewer cookbooks. The point here was that a cookbook represents some sort of knowledge that's like a workaround for something that ideally would just be automated for you by having better code abstractions. And I think it's obviously much more difficult to like find a general solution and move it upstream, but also if you can do that, then we should be trying to do that. I'd also like to see software that can scale truly arbitrarily large. Like we still haven't really cracked like the super large scales. We generally find that like things work on a sort of medium scale, and then if you get too big, something will go wrong. But this is changing all the time with a lot of changes in Dask, and then but also not just Dask. There's like a large unexplored space here that I've been pushing of different distributed array backends. And in my opinion, my personal opinion, the ultimate dream of truly arbitrary scaling would be like serverless distributed arrays. There's even some interesting ideas being floated, and I've got a lot of links to this that I will share to everybody later. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, then I will provide you with links to go and read about these various points. One idea is to distribute computation across GPUs, which would also be super interesting. Another thing we could do is Rustify, use Rust to rewrite various parts of the stack. I mean, I heard someone say, it's like tongue in cheek, that Rust was the biggest thing to happen in Python this year, which I think is pretty accurate. And I don't think we should be afraid to rewrite certain parts of the stack in languages that are more type safe and performant if it would really be worthwhile. So concrete examples would be, there's this idea of rewriting FS spec in Rust, but also there's someone working on a Rust reader for Czar. Another completely different, but well, not completely different actually, but better machine learning integration. Like people already use this stack with machine learning, but the interface is nowhere near as good as it could be, especially in terms of performance of loading lots of data in, which is absolutely key for like saturating GPU. What else? So one big gripe is that we still haven't really got a good bridge between geospatial coordinate world and X-array data. This was supposed to be resolved by GeoX-array, but it's kind of stalled. And the GeoStar standard, GeoZar standard has also stalled. And that's a bit of a problem because we've got this like, we have a lot in common with the geospatial community, but they have a different stack, and bridging those two communities would be better than the current situation would be highly valuable. Relatedly, X-array's been generalizing in a few ways, and we've been working on this flexible indexes thing for a while, but we're still not really there, which is frustrating because it affects the geospatial situation, but also it means that we're missing some like basic but very helpful things like interval indexes for like histogram bins or like finite volume sort of widths in model grids, wraparound indexes, like not having to worry about international dateline anymore, and performant indexes for other cases. Like there's a lot of cool stuff that I think people would just get a lot of benefit from that we still haven't really realized yet. I think we could have more open standards. I think FS spec could have more of an explicit specification, for example. Hypothesis testing everywhere would be awesome. See my note in the sign-in doc if you want to read about that. There's some cool stuff happening with query optimization. Basically like compiling your computational calls to a simpler but equivalent call before you actually execute anything. And it's happening, the work is currently happening in Dask expression for Dask data frames, but it's a really interesting idea whether or not this is applicable to our array-based computations as well. I also think it should just be way easier to just make a cool movie from your data. Like everybody would do this in all of their presentations if we made this easier. There's space in the stack for just like some package that's like not that complicated, but everybody will use it. Oh, and then also similar for 3D visualization. It's obviously a much harder problem, but the scope, given that we have these whole like ZAR, like parallel access, you can load chunks by chunks. Like if you go and see a demo of like what Napari does, for example, they can visualize like um terabyte scale data sets like interactively. It's amazing. Like we should be doing the same, but like we're almost there, but we're not quite there because we've not fully bridged some of these things together. Okay, so that was the long one, software. Data management. What do I think's gone well? The fact that we can access the data through the cloud is obviously like half the point of Pangeo and a big win. I also think that Kachunk as a concept and Kachunk as an interface to avoid having to deal with these like avoid having to copy entire sets of netcdf files is pretty clever. But what could we do better? I think version controlled ZAR stores would be amazing. Obviously, this is what Earthmover are working on. I also think cataloging could be a lot better. Especially if we integrated it with thinking about trees of hierarchical data. And there's often a sense in which a scientific data set is much more akin to a tree structure than a single X-ray data set is. It's rarely the case that a scientific data set of interest, like including all ensemble members, for example, can be represented as a single X-ray data set. It's often much better thought of as a tree. So I'd like to see that kind of like penetrate the stack more. And one obvious place for that is in cataloging. ETL pipelines. Pangeo Forge is amazing, but it's very ambitious and its future is not yet certain. And I'd like to see some kind of like longer term project around here, because the ETL pipeline ends up, if we're telling everybody to move their data to the cloud, helping them move their data to the cloud is a crucial part of that. And relatedly, this whole issue of like how you get the data from HPC to the cloud is much more annoying than I would personally like it to be. One cool project you might want to have a look at is this thing called Skyplane, which is coming out of the Berkeley lab. It's intended for cloud-to-cloud transfers, but it could potentially be used for HPC to cloud transfers, and I think that's worth watching. Okay, how am I doing for time? All right. Community. What's gone well in terms of the Pangeo community? We've got pretty good impact. Like, just as one example, there are roughly 60 Pangeo related talks at AGU this year. And I'd say that as a personal anecdote, if I start talking to some random climate scientists in the US, there's like a 50-50 chance that they've like heard of and used some of these tools, which is pretty cool. I think we've done very well at developing for real user needs, rather than just like going off in some direction that doesn't actually directly represent what users want. And I think the reason that this has happened is because we have a good blurring of the distinction between the developers and the users, which means that the developers understand what users actually want, and there's like a close communication there. I think our educational resources like Pythia are pretty good. I think that we do well at public discussions, both on Discourse, which is a great resource, but also just the fact everything is on GitHub. Like if a zombie apocalypse happened tomorrow, like you could rebuild the entirety of a Pangeo stack just by reading like 1,000 GitHub issues. And that's actually really cool and really useful. What's next? Okay, so what could we do more? What could we do to improve this, to go further in terms of the Pangeo community? I think we want way more adoption in other fields of science. Like there's like technical reasons in some cases why this hasn't happened, but most of the time, like other fields of science could be benefiting massively from the stuff that we built here. And I can tell you personally that it's like not the case that most fields of science are like ahead of us or anything like that. I think that we could do better in terms of providing resources on how to be a good community participant or a good developer or maintainer, rather than just how to actually use the tools. I think that there's space for live chatting, not just asynchronous chatting. And we have this new Discourse. That's what this QR code is for. If you're interested, it's Discord, sorry, not Discourse. Diversity is a big elephant in the room in the community. We're pretty bad at that. Like as a software community and geoscience both have diversity issues, it means that Pangeo also has diversity issues. So things we could do, I mean, this obviously deserves like a whole talk in itself, but more active outreach to underrepresented communities, support for languages other than English would be great. Finally, better integration across different Pangeo entities would be ideal, especially now that Pangeo actually has some form of legal status through NumFocus. Okay, so here's a big one. Funding and careers. What's gone well? We won some grants. NumFocus is now a fiscal sponsor of Pangeo. We have a well-used job section on Discourse that actually gets people employed, which is good. But funding for maintenance is hard unless you're a really big project like X-Ray. And so we need more paid internships and mentorships for early career scientists, and a pipeline. And that's part of needing a pipeline for generating maintainers. Like we're having a bit of a problem where some of our core maintainer teams are kind of like not aging, but like moving to a point where they want to like have other responsibilities. And I'm not sure that we're like filling it up at the bottom. Part of the issue is a structural problem that you're all aware of like credit not being proportional to effort, both in the sense of like citation, but also in the sense of software. Like if you can say that you're a member of like the core developers or whatever, it kind of like carries extra weight. Whereas if you contribute in a very useful way by raising issues and PRs and stuff, then it uses up your time, but you don't necessarily get to like claim proportional credit. And then just generally, like there's this big issue of if you want to make your whole career just like making these kind of tools better, there's not very many options for how to get employed. You generally have to like find a company that allows you to like do what the company wants and then also dabble in your own stuff and company time, which is not really scalable or sustainable. Okay, so we're getting to the end now. So democratization bless you. Democratization of science. I would say that quite a lot of us, me included, feel that Pangeo is more than just like having cool software tools. It's also about like trying to make science more open in many different senses of the word open. So what have we done here already that's cool? I think the fact that we put like societally, historically critical data sets like CMIP6 on the cloud, and in doing so made them much more public than they have ever been before is really cool and worth celebrating. I think there are some great outreach and education projects that built upon Pangeo, for example, Climate Match and also the Ghana Oceanography Summer School that Paige was involved with. These are both really cool examples, and the sort of cloud-based tools that we've got really enabled this kind of stuff. But how could we go further? I think that if you think that the stack is now like ready to be used and ready to be used in a sort of decentralized like international way, then the next logical step is to go about actually trying to like transfer that knowledge to places in the world that aren't like US and the EU. Another a rogue idea that might be fun for someone is like LLM powered natural language interfaces. Like imagine how Iron Man talks to his like Jarvis whatever in like natural language and it just does science for him. Like that's the kind of user interface I really want. Also HPC in the cloud, like we kind of only really talk about the analytics part of stuff in Pangeo, and obviously that's because it's in the mission statement. But if you really want to democratize this kind of stuff, then you got to think about how the actual climate models, for example, are going to be run in a way that doesn't require you to have like institutional access to a NASA supercomputer, for example. So like, so there's some interesting work going on about running HPC in the cloud now. Okay, I think this is the final section, scientific publishing. So this is kind of similar to the last bullet point in the sense that it's like not obviously directly in the remit of Pangeo, but it's kind of closely related. And I expect a lot of the sort of people who think that our software tools are more open probably also think that our scientific publishing should be more open. And so we've contributed to this in the sense that we've provided tools to make like ZAR data actually available, not just upon reasonable request, which we all know doesn't really mean very much in practice. And I've already mentioned some great outreach and education projects. Oh, wait. does that twice. Okay. But how could we do better? So the models, the cost models for archiving this data are not really convincing yet. Even if this is just like purely kind of a funding or legal problem, like how exactly this is going to work to store that cloud data and who's going to pay for it, for how long, and what level, how hot or cold the storage is. We got to think. I think we should be thinking harder about this. And once it's up there, there's a lot more cool stuff that we could do in terms of accompanying papers with visualizations of the data sets. This goes in hand with better cataloging. Another thing that would be awesome is like a more automated software or data set citation network, which would allow you to have more nuanced models of credit given to people. Like, I'm not convinced that PDF papers that have explicit citations in Google Scholar is like the way that we should be trying to include totally different types of objects like software and data set and uploaded data sets into the scientific enterprise. I think it needs to be more clever than that, more nuanced than that. I also personally think that we should not be trying to disseminate results in the form of a Jupyter notebook. I think that they're good for prototyping, but actually kind of horrible for distributing code that you expect someone else to rerun. And I'll link you to an entertaining but provocative talk on that. All right, I'm done. Hopefully, at least one of those bullet points was interesting to you. We're going to share in the chat a document for you all to comment on. Maybe someone already shared it, but if not, we'll do it now. So please go forth and comment. The QR code should link you there, or you could just type this in. And thanks to various people for ideas that have gone into this doc, both helping me write it yesterday and also just giving me their thoughts and time over the past couple of years. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Just a quick reminder for everyone who dropped in, we're going to be recording the whole discussion. But yeah, other than that, I hope you have some good comments.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on how you would like to structure this discussion? You've just opened about a week's worth of potential discussion topics, and we've got 35 minutes left. So we could just make it a free-for-all, and whoever raises their hand can share their opinion, or perhaps you have a framework in mind.
I should have thought harder about this. I did not, which means maybe we default to a free-for-all, unless you have other ideas, Ryan.
I have a suggestion. So in this situation, I recommend an Amazon-style meeting. In these Amazon-style meetings, you're given a doc with some context. People read the doc and they comment on that doc. And we can all asynchronously engage in comments as a group without sort of taking the lock of the entire conversation. After about 10 or 15 minutes of asynchronous time in the doc, then sort of the unresolved bigger items, Tom decides what to talk about and he goes through them and we have a discussion on those topics. But with this many people and this many topics, sometimes async on a Google Doc actually allows everyone to express a lot concurrently.
That sounds good to me. We already have that Google Doc. It's already been shared in the chat. So maybe we should just set a certain number of minutes for people to go in there with no expectation of like vocal chatting while everyone just goes through and types out what they think. And then we'll come back after. How long should we say?
I would suggest that in 10 minutes, Tom, you decide based on the activity in the doc, whether or not to allow another 5 minutes or to start conversation now. You'll have a good sense, I think, if there's a lot of activity.
That sounds good to me. All right. Let's go.
I got you timing on 10 minutes.
Can we put some elevator music on or something?
Just awkward silence. Just awkward silence, everyone.
Does anyone use Figma? It has that great feature. Anyway.
Hey, I'm riding a bike in Tasmania, and I could like sing if you'd like.
Go for it, Thomas.
Except the traffic's pretty loud. And all I know are kid songs at the moment. Row, row, row.
I'll actually be a jerk here and actually suggest that we like enforce awkward silence because it's like hard to both listen to audio and like engage in a doc concurrently. So I recommend actually are just awkwardly silent for 10 minutes.
Right, Matt has spoken.
All right, Matt, you can lead the way in the awkwardness.
think we're breaking Google Docs here.
Add it to the doc.
I think in 1 minute it'll be 10 minutes. Okay, so there's obviously a huge amount of stuff going on the doc, and I encourage you all to keep commenting. Some bits that several people have commented on that are interesting are the relationship between like geospatial models and sort of indexes that aren't just stored as coordinate arrays, is clearly very impactful. I don't know if anyone wants to like give their piece on that. Maybe Michael Sumner. But we also don't have to.
I don't know if Michael's going to speak up, but I think I understand his perspective as he's been very vocal about it, which is really just comes down to X-array, which is pretty central to what we do, really being built on the netCDF concept of indexes, or rather dimension coordinates, where you have like an explicit array that provides the coordinates for another array. And there's a lot of domains where instead that is implicit, and you specify some parameters that describe the space over which the data exist. We can build those sort of things in X-array, but then the question comes, how will we serialize them and store them? Because if that's not compatible with the netCDF data model, then we have two choices. We can expand the netCDF data model, or we can fork and start adding a lot of things in X-array that aren't going to be writable to a netCDF file. And that's a pretty tough choice. netCDF is pretty slow to evolve new features quite deliberately. And so it's a pretty tricky question.
If no one wants to comment on that, then maybe Ryan, you could also talk about, you've got this long comment about being the person who won the grants that supported the original Pangeo hubs, and there's a lot of people talking there about infrastructure going forward and so on. So maybe you want to give a little summary of what you wrote there.
I mean, I feel pretty strongly that this community has heard enough from me, and I'd really like to hear from others. I think what I wrote in there is pretty self-explanatory. So I'll pass on that opportunity and yield the floor to someone else. Maybe someone who has some suggestions about what to do next about the hubs would be interested in hearing.
Scott, I know you have ideas here.
Yeah. Well, I agree with Ryan that maybe something new is in order. I've floated some ideas of like picking some key places to point people to, because I think that central interface of like having a lot of people using the same system is really valuable. So I think of like Planetary Computer as being a hub there that we can just say, hey, people use this. I also floated the idea of a Pangeo-backed coiled account. We could do the same sort of Google form type admission and have a ton of credits from cloud providers that potentially are backed in some way to make it really easy for people to try things, or thinking about like just leaving compute to individuals and doing something like having these kind of public buckets that people can use workflows to write to, etc. Some ideas, but I don't know what the right one is. So I love to see these comments from people with other ideas as well.
I propose that there's too much to talk about in 18 minutes with these people. I'm again going to like administratively opinionated, and I apologize, but like maybe what we should do for the next 15 minutes is just like assemble some topics people want to discuss. People can sign up for those topics, And then someone can like take ownership over making sure that conversation happens and notes get forwarded back to this group. Like there's a lot of things to talk about. We'll probably not all focus on all of them. I'm super interested in the topic we just mentioned, but like I'm probably not going to be as interested in democratizing science. I apologize. There's a lot of energy that was generated from this presentation. Kudos to Tom and folks who worked on it. I think in my community organizer mind, like, great, how do I harness this energy? How do I like maintain that and push that forwards and leverage it? And I think the answer is follow up conversations like this one in smaller groups.
I like that idea. I think if a positive step from this discussion would be the formation or sort of discussions leading to maybe some more Pangeo working groups of people who are interested in the same thing. So maybe I'll make a couple of bullet points at the bottom of the doc that just group some general categories that seem to have come up for a lot of people, and then we can, I don't know, people stick their names there, or how do we think we should do that?
It's just a list of topics. People can then assign themselves those topics. And then if you want to possibly organize, you would bold your name. That would be my recommendation.
Sounds good.
Are the topics the same as how you laid them out, Tom? Or are there other topics we've identified that don't quite align with those categories? I'm inclined to just go with the original categories you had because we've got 15 minutes.
Yeah, I'll start by putting those 8. Okay, all right. Let's just relist them. If anyone wants to help me relist them, that would be great.
Who is the host for this meeting?
Julius.
That's me.
Do we have breakout capability?
That's a good question. I took this over last minute.
I'm pretty sure we do. I think I'm also a host and I can see them.
All right, so just start creating some.
Well, do we want to create the rooms right now?
I wouldn't mind having like an hour-long conversation about a few of these topics and not like the subsequent hour, because I might be busy the subsequent hour.
Yeah, I don't think we can really assume that everyone is free the hour after the hour that we've already are taking up, unfortunately.
Max, you want to chime in?
On the organizing side of things, there's been some discussion in the chat on the data loaders and ML connections thread. And for that, we already have a Pangeo ML working group. If anyone's interested in this topic, please come to the next meeting on February 6th or reach out through the Pangeo Discourse if you'd like to have a conversation before our next regularly scheduled meeting. Usually they're monthly, but given the next first Tuesday is the day after the new year, we're not having one in January.
Thomas? I don't mean to jump in here, Julius. Feel free. I'm just seeing some hands raised. Thomas.
Hey, thanks, Paige. Look, everything Matt said about making this meeting efficient is really, really super helpful. I just wonder if we can add some kind of voting system to prioritize these things so that the asynchronous stuff, we can first vote on what's the most important, and that'll rise to the top, and maybe that'll help us move forward. Not sure what that is, though.
My hope is that there's not a sequentiality that has to exist. My hope is that many of these conversations can happen concurrently. And so the prioritization may be less importance. Now, certainly within each group, there might be some need to prioritize or vote things. I'm happy to make other suggestions on how to vote asynchronously in documents.
So you're saying we should take this big chunk of work and split it up into smaller chunks and then process them in parallel?
Something like that. Yes, Ryan.
Typical, Matt. And let me guess, you have
how do you chunk it?
That's going to do that for us, right?
It's almost free. It's very, very cheap. You'll love it, Ryan.
So one option is while we're choosing our own groups, we could spend the last 10 or so minutes going into breakout rooms and starting those discussions, if that's of interest. Okay, I don't know how many rooms to do. I'm gonna create 10 breakout rooms, and we can decide which ones are which, because I can't seem to. Oh, I can label them. Never mind. Okay. All right, give me a moment.
Okay, while Paige is valiantly doing that, does anyone have anything from their weekly updates that they could not live without sharing for another week?
Oh, I do. If anyone's going to AGU, we have a lot going on, and I encourage you to sign up to help at the Pangeo booth, and we can talk about things we've been talking about today. I think that would be great. Okay, I'm done.
I might suggest that the important thing to talk about this document is how we get it done, and less so about the details under each of these topics. Does anyone else think that?
Get what done?
This long list, this is the long to-do list, and I'm just looking at it, it's like, who's going to do this? And how does that happen? And I know there are like ideas here, so maybe that's the thing to talk about as like an overarching theme.
So again, at the bottom of this document, the very bottom, there's a new list, which has topics, and then people who want to sign up to talk more about that topic. So I'd encourage people to spend a couple minutes and looking at those topics. And if you want to participate, maybe you're someone who's going to work on that in the future, you might add your name to those sublists. I'm seeing some folks are down there now already.
Okay, I think you should all be able to see the rooms that I started. So I made 5 for the 5 broad categories and made 2 extras in case I missed something. So if we want like the last 10 minutes, we can at least continue the discussion while we're on here of whatever topic you're most interested in. And then maybe I'll close the rooms with a minute to go so we can all come together and have some final words about how we'll continue this, to Deepak's point.
That sounds good to me.
Did I miss the data one?
Yeah, I feel like a couple of extra like bullet points have been added since the second list was created. So community and data management.
Oh shoot, I need to add a new room.
That was my bad.
Well,
I feel like getting into a breakout room and then coming back within 10 minutes seems challenging.
challenging for all of you or for me?
I think it'd be challenging to have a conversation that is meaningful in 5 minutes. Like, what should we talk about? Oops, we're out of time. I think that's what I expect the breakout rooms to turn out.
But you could at least see who's interested in the same topic and see each other in the eyes.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, I think that on its own is worthwhile. Identifying common reasons to care about a topic.
Okay, I just designated extra, I can't seem to rename it at this point. So extra room 1 is data management and extra room 2 is user experience. And the only one we're missing, I think, is community, which I might lump into democratization of science at the moment. And we can split those if we want, but those might be overlapping.
Thank you, Paige.
Yep, I'll hang out here for a little bit while we all sort ourselves into rooms.
I'm also going to stop recording. I think that's...
Oh, yeah, good point. Thanks, Julius. And